The Ottoman Empire operated under different rules, but produced similar tragedies. Sultan Mehmed III, who ruled from 1595 to 1603, reportedly had a son born with distinctive features and developmental delays. Ottoman succession laws were particularly brutal. Princes literally fought to the death for the throne, and any sign of weakness meant certain elimination. This unnamed prince didn't die in infancy, as records claim. Instead, he was sent to the Kafes, a cage, a luxurious prison within Topkapi Palace, where potential heirs were kept in isolation to prevent succession wars. Eunuch records show food and supplies delivered to a specific room in the Kafes for 23 years after this prince's supposed death. Guards reported strange sounds from that room, not the usual protests or plotting of imprisoned princes, but singing the same songs over and over, and laughter hours. When Sultan Ahmed I died in 1617 and succession chaos erupted, every room in the Kafes was open to account for potential heirs. One room, according to a guard's memoir written decades later, contained an adult man with the mind of a child, surrounded by thousands of pieces of colored glass arranged in intricate patterns across the floor. He had spent 2 decades creating art no one would ever see, humming songs no one would ever hear, living a life no one would ever acknowledge. What happened to him in that moment of discovery? The records cease abruptly. Another ghost absorbed into palace walls. Bavaria's Wittelsbach dynasty left more traces of their hidden children, perhaps because Mad King Ludwig made eccentricity almost fashionable. His cousin, Princess Alexandra, born in 1826, was kept at Nymphenburg Palace in what servants called the Quiet Wing. Official biographies claim she died at age 3, but household accounts show expenses for her care, continuing until 1851. A governess's diary, donated to the Bavarian State Library in 1923, describes teaching a 25-year-old woman basic tasks: how to dress herself, how to use a spoon properly, how to recognize letters, though she would never form words. This governess wrote with unexpected tenderness about Alexandra's love for her pet canaries, how she would sit for hours listening to them sing, perfectly content in a world that required nothing more from her than simple existence. Yet even this relative kindness came with conditions. Alexandra could live, but she couldn't be seen. She could exist, but not as a princess, not as a person whose name appeared in any succession documents. When she finally died, her body was quietly interred in an unmarked section of the royal crypt. No ceremony, no announcement, as if 25 years of life could be erased by pretending they never happened. Portugal's House of Braganza faced their crisis in 1734 when Infanta Maria Francisca was born to King João V. Court painters were immediately commissioned to create her official portrait standard practice for royal births. But the portrait was never completed. The artist, Jean Rank, left Portugal abruptly, his commission unpaid, his sketches burned. Years later, dying in Madrid, Rank confessed to a priest about the infant princess whose features he could unpaint in a way that would satisfy the king. "How do you paint innocence itself?" he reportedly asked, "when innocence is not what power demands?" Maria Francisca lived until age 11, hidden in the convent of Santo Sonovo in Lisbon. Nuns who cared for her left records of a child who loved helping with simple tasks, folding altar cloths, feeding the convent's chickens, singing along to prayers, though she never learned the words. When fever took her in 1745, the nuns requested permission to bury her in their cemetery rather than return her body to the royal family. Permission was granted immediately, almost eagerly. Her grave marker reads simply God's child. No name, no dates, no connection to the throne she could never have inherited. Denmark employed a different strategy with Prince Gustav, born in 1803 to Frederick VI. Rather than hide him completely, they created an elaborate fiction. Gustav, they claimed, suffered from a nervous condition requiring constant travel for his health. In reality, he was moved between remote royal properties every few months, never staying long enough for local populations to notice his differences. His tutors, really minders, submitted false reports about his progress in studies, while actually teaching him basic life skills. Letters from these tutors, preserved in Danish royal archives, reveal their struggle to maintain the charade while developing genuine affection for their charge. One tutor, Hans Eriksson, wrote extensively about Gustav's unique abilities, his perfect recall of every person he'd ever met, his ability to predict weather changes days in advance, his strange gift for knowing when someone was lying. Perhaps, Eriksson wrote, we measure intelligence too narrowly. The prince understands things I do not, sees patterns I cannot perceive. Who truly has the deficit him, or those of us who cannot enter his world? But Eriksson's progressive thinking found no support in the Danish court. When Gustav died at 31, officially of pneumonia, but likely from heart conditions common in Down syndrome, his death was announced as occurring in Italy during one of his health treatments. His body was returned to Denmark at night, buried before dawn, his entire existence compressed into a single line in royal genealogy. Sweden's Bernadotte dynasty, relatively new to royalty, might have been expected to handle difference with more modern sensibility. But when Prince Carlos was born in 1852 with clear developmental disabilities, they followed the same playbook as older dynasties. Official records state he died at 3 months old. Unofficial record servant testimonies, physician bills, food requisitions suggest he lived at least until age 9 at Tolgarn Palace, 30 miles from Stockholm. A groundskeeper's son, writing memoirs in his old age, recalled playing with a strange boy in the palace gardens who couldn't speak but laughed constantly, who feared nothing and no one, who would sit transfixed by ant colonies for hours. This boy appeared only when the royal family was absent, vanishing days before their returns. He was like a ghost, the memoir states, but the happiest ghost imaginable. These patterns repeated across every European dynasty. Birth, recognition of difference, concealment, erasure. Royal blood that wasn't royal enough. Divine right undermined by human variation. The very qualities that make individuals with Down syndrome often extraordinarily loving and joyful. Their freedom from the pretensions and cruelties that torment typical people were antithetical to power structures built on hierarchy and carefully controlled bloodlines. These forgotten children teach us that the true measure of power isn't found in crowns or bloodlines, but in how we treat those who can't defend themselves. Behind every palace's golden facade lie unmarked graves and erased names, reminding us that humanity's greatest shame often hides behind its most beautiful masks. Their silence speaks louder than any royal decree. Picture this. You're standing in the opulent halls of Versailles in 1742, surrounded by gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow fragments across marble floors. The air thick with perfume and whispered gossip, you watch as courtiers bow deeply to passing royalty. But there's something they're not telling you. Behind one of those ornate doors sits a child who will never appear in any official portrait. A prince whose existence threatens the very foundation of everything these palaces represent. You see, this child was born with what we now know as Down syndrome, but in an era where royal blood was supposed to flow pure and perfect, where kings claimed their power came directly from God himself. Such a birth wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. This little prince, with his distinctive features and gentle spirit, represented something that monarchy simply could not acknowledge, that even divine bloodlines produced human variation. The condition we call Down syndrome today results from an extra copy of chromosome 21, causing distinctive facial features, intellectual disabilities, and often heart problems. But for centuries before John Langdon Down described it in 1866, these children were seen as divine punishment, family curses, or evidence of tainted bloodlines. Royal families, who built their entire legitimacy on claims of superior breeding and God's favor, faced an impossible choice when such children entered their gilded world. Consider the brutal mathematics of royal existence. Every prince and princess served as living political currency, future marriage contracts walking on two legs, breathing symbols of dynastic power. They needed to master complex languages, navigate treacherous court politics, and eventually produce their own perfect heirs. A child who might drool during state dinners, who could never learn the intricate dance of international diplomacy, who would forever remain innocent in a world built on calculated cruelty. Such a child didn't just embarrass the family. They threatened the entire system. Take Prince John of the United Kingdom, born in 1905 to King George V and Queen Mary. For his first few years, Johnny appeared in official photographs, dressed in miniature sailor suits alongside his siblings, presented to dignitaries as befitted his royal status. But around age 4, everything changed. The seizures began, accompanied by learning difficulties and facial features that modern experts recognize as consistent with Down syndrome, though this was never officially confirmed. By 1909, Johnny had vanished from public life entirely. Not dead, but disappeared into what the family euphemistically called hair. He was relocated to Wood Farm, a remote farmhouse on the Sandringham estate, with only his devoted nurse Charlotte Bill for company. His grandmother, Queen Alexandra, would occasionally visit what she called poor little Johnny, writing in her diary about a child who lived in his own world, collecting acorns and laughing at games only he understood. His siblings were actively discouraged from visiting. His parents maintained clinical distance, viewing him through the cold lens of duty rather than parental love. When Johnny died in 1919 at just 13 years old following a severe seizure, Queen Mary wrote to a friend that his death was a release for the child and perhaps greatest mercy for the poor little soul. Those words, release and mercy, reveal everything about how these families viewed their different children. Not as human beings deserving love and care, but as problems requiring solutions. Yet behind the official narrative of tragedy and relief, glimpses of humanity occasionally break through. Johnny's nurse kept every drawing he made, every photograph, every small treasure he collected during his brief life. After his death, she was quietly pensioned off, taking with her memories of a boy who loved music and animals, who found joy in simple pleasures. Her devotion painted a picture far different from the royal family's story of burden and shame. Travel back further to Louis XIV's France in 1640, where whispers spread through the palace of Fontainebleau about a child born to King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria, child who appeared before the future Sun King himself. Court records, carefully sanitized for posterity, mention only a weak infant who failed to thrive. But private letters between royal physicians, discovered centuries later hidden in Vatican archives, describe features we now instantly recognize: the flattened nasal bridge, the distinctive palm creases, the protruding tongue. This unnamed prince lived exactly 43 days. His wet nurse, interrogated repeatedly by suspicious court officials, swore she had fed him properly, that she had done nothing wrong. Of course, she had done nothing wrong. The child likely suffered from the heart defects that affect nearly half of all babies born with Down syndrome. But in an era where infant death required blame, where royal blood was supposedly stronger than common stock, someone had to be at fault. Palace servants whispered about the special prayers Anne of Austria commissioned, the desperate pilgrimages she made to distant shrines seeking explanation for why God had marked her child. Some blamed the king's sins, others pointed to the queen's Spanish blood. Still others cited unfavorable astronomical alignments at the moment of conception. What no one dared suggest was that sometimes nature simply creates variation, that this child was not punishment or curse, but simply different. Such thinking wouldn't emerge for centuries. In Russia, the Romanov dynasty dealt with their own hidden shame. While history remembers Tsarevich Alexis and his hemophilia, few know about Grand Duke Alexander's youngest daughter. Born in 1882, her name appears in no official genealogies, mentioned only as infant daughter died young, if at all. But payroll records from the Alexander Palace show continuous payments to specific servants assigned to the nursery S East Wing for 16 years after her supposed death, long after an infantess death would require such attention. Letters between ladies-in-waiting describe a girl who never learned to speak properly, who at 14 still played with dolls meant for toddlers who had to be watched constantly lest she wander into the frozen gardens wearing only her nightgown, laughing at falling snowflakes. When revolution came in 1917, this forgotten Grand Duchess simply vanished from history. Did revolutionary soldiers find her in that East Wing nursery, this woman-child who couldn't understand why everyone was screaming? Did a loyal servant spirit her away to some remote village where a simple-minded woman who loved dolls might live unnoticed? Or did the fleeing family make a calculated decision about who could and couldn't be saved? We'll never know. Revolution has a way of erasing inconvenient truths along with the regimes that created them. Spain's Habsburg line, already infamous for their inbreeding, produced numerous children with various disabilities. While Charles II's massive underbite and mental limitations are well documented, he had siblings and cousins who never made it into official portraits, who never received names or titles worth recording. Spanish court physicians, writing in coded Latin, they hoped would outlive them, documented infants born with what they called Mongol features, terminology that wouldn't become formally medical for another 2 centuries. He noted her small stature, her difficulty swallowing, her profound developmental delays, but also something else that clearly moved him. Zapata was ultimately burned by the Inquisition for heresy, not for his medical observations,